Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to art class. We'll go ahead and get started with this week's project. Now this week's a little bit different than some of the other ones we've done so far. This will be a little more like some of the ones that we've done in class that take, multiple classes to finish. So this project is actually going to be 2 weeks. Next week I will post like a new page with a new video, but that's kind of mostly just to check in and maybe review some stuff real quick. At the bottom of this page you will find one of those Flipgrid links like you've been using to turn stuff in. You don't have to worry about using that to turn anything in. That's just if you have any questions as the week goes by and you're working on this, because I really do. I want you to work on it, slowly throughout this time. Don't try and rush and finish it in one day. Take all the time you need. But if during this week of time you have any questions, then you can use that Flipgrid link to ask me those questions, or you can always email me, and if I can answer it on the email, I will, and if not, then we might need to do like the Google Meet thing, which is fine. So, on to the project. We've been talking a lot so far this year about perspective. We learned a lot about one-point perspective, which is how we see when we're looking straight ahead at something. That's also how we see when we're looking at something that is flat. So if I'm standing in front of a building, looking at the front of it, that's how I'm going to be seeing. What we're talking about today is when we start to talk about looking at things in different angles, not just flat, not just straight on, and the name of that is two-point perspective. The difference between one-point perspective and two-point perspective is simple. One-point perspective has one vanishing point. Two-point perspective has two vanishing points. That's it. Congratulations, you've passed two-point perspective. We'll talk a little bit about how this works. I'll show you the differences, the different things that you kind of need to think about. But again, this is a way of drawing in perspective that is similar to how we see things in the real world. Now, when you're looking at something, your eyes are only ever going to be able to focus on just one vanishing point at a time. But that doesn't mean that there aren't more vanishing points. So once you figured out one-point perspective, that's how our eyes see. All the other ones, because there's two-point perspective and there's 3, 4, 5, there's crazy amounts of different point perspectives. What you're doing once you're drawing anything higher than one, it's still for a little while gonna look like real life and maybe even more like real life, but that's not how our eyes actually see in the real world. Our eyes can only ever see one vanishing point at a time. So the reason to add more vanishing points into your artwork is just to make it look a little more real. Now there are, 6, 7 point perspectives. That's not real. That's not how we see anything in the real world, but we'll talk more about that later. All right. Before we get started drawing, I wanted to try and show you something that could hopefully maybe explain some of the differences between one-point perspective and two-point perspective. If you're like me, you're going to need to actually see that happen. You're not going to learn it from just me telling you with words. It's always better to see something. So let's watch this other video real quick and we'll come back after that. All right, guys, so let's look at this cube for a second. Now, this is just like the cubes we drew, except this is a real one. This is a three-dimensional cube that's in the real world. But I wanted to show you first how this actually works, so you know that the things we learned about drawing work in the real world, but also this is going to be how we start talking about this next kind of perspective, which is two-point perspective. So if we look at this cube, and we look for the vanishing point, the same way we did in our drawings, we'll see that it's right there. It's near the top of the screen, a little bit to the right of the center. So if we move this cube and look for our vanishing point now, we can see that it's pretty much in the same place. So the reason this happens, the reason it worked in the drawings and the reason it worked in these pictures is the camera didn't move. So the perspective never changed. Now, let's talk about 2-point perspective. So let's go ahead and spin this cube around a little bit. When we were looking at from the front, when we were looking at it at 1-point perspective, it didn't matter where it was. The front that we were looking at was straight. It was flat. It was facing right towards us. Now we're looking at it from an angle. We're not looking at it from any flat surface. And what that means is we no longer have just one vanishing point. We're going to have two. And that's the big difference. 2-point perspective, you have two vanishing points. Now, in this example that you're seeing right now, those vanishing points actually end up off of the screen. If this was a drawing, they would end up off the page, which is something that can happen, and it's something that you can use. It just has to do with how big the drawing is. In our case right now, it's how big that cube is in our picture. Because sometimes you might not always be able to get to those vanishing points either within the picture that you have or on the page. If we move it though, if we start scooting it down just a little and we give ourselves a little more room, we can get to it. So there's my vanishing point right there. Now this is still 2-point perspective, but I just wanted you to see that where you place things on your page, especially with 2-point perspective, means you might not even see the vanishing points on your paper. Ours, for what we're going to start working on today, we will be able to see them. And since it's a thing you're creating, if you always want to know where those vanishing points are, you can always have them there. That's fine. I just wanted you to see that sometimes our vanishing point is made up. We can't see it. It's off in the distance somewhere. That doesn't really happen in real life, but that happens on pictures and photography and things like that. All right. So hopefully that helped. Hopefully that helped you see kind of how what we've learned about drawing in perspective does actually work in the real world. And it showed you just a little bit about the difference between 1-point perspective and 2-point perspective, in that 2-point perspective has multiple vanishing points. That also showed you something that we're not really going to use for this project, but it is good to know. You don't always see the vanishing point in the artwork. Now for ours, we're going to, but you don't always see it. It's not always the dot on the page. All right, my friends, let's get it started drawing and we can get started working on this thing. All right, everybody, let's start talking about 2-point perspective. For today, you're gonna need some paper, you are gonna need a pencil, you will probably want an eraser, and you will need something to help you make some straight lines. So before we do that, I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, a couple of examples that will show you like what our project is actually going to be and how the 2-point perspective makes them look like they do. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be drawing a city block. So think of a block in a big city like New York where there's, big tall buildings, skyscrapers, things like that. So if you look at this example of the city block, you will see that we have two vanishing points. Things are getting smaller, buildings are getting shorter as they're going away from us in two directions, over to the far right side of the page and over to the far left side of the page. Now, just like the other stuff that we've done with perspective, all of the diagonal lines in this picture are pointing towards a vanishing point. Now they won't all be the same vanishing point, which we'll talk about in a minute, but they're pointing towards a vanishing point. So here is an example of probably what our projects will turn out to look like. The first example had a ton of details, and if you've got a good handle on this and you're doing a good job and you want to add a bunch of details, then go for it. That's fine. Take all the time you want. If this is something that you are, just kind of figuring out the basics of, then there's nothing wrong with doing a simpler version like this one too. One last thing, another picture that might help you during this, that I will put on the site below the lesson, is this thing. This is kind of a step-by-step instruction list of how we're going to start this project. That way you can look at this, you can look at the video, you can look at these pictures. All of this should be helpful. All right, guys, so we're going to start off just like we start off our 1-point perspective. We need a horizon, and we need our vanishing points. Now you don't have to add these if you don't want to, because for what we're doing, all of our vanishing points are going to be in the exact same spot. One will be on this side, one will be on this side. Now for the next step, which is going to be the first building, the center building, the building that we are looking at the corner of, I'm going to draw a line that starts near the top of my page and goes down towards the bottom of my page. It does not need to go all the way to the bottom or all the way top. We do want it pretty tall, because if this starts real short, then your buildings are going to get so skinny by the time you get towards your vanishing point that they'll disappear and you won't even see them. I mean, they'll start getting to where they'll disappear, like here, if you started small. So I'm going to start with a pretty big line. Now, the next step is to draw a diamond shape, and I'm going to use the top of this line, and I'm going to draw a line that connects down to the end of that one. I'm going to do the same thing over here, top of that line to the end of my horizon line, and then I'm going to do the same on the bottom, going up. Bottom of my center line, going up to the horizon on that side, bottom here, going over there. Now we should all start with something like this. You don't want to draw super dark because there is going to be some erasing involved. If you draw light, it's much easier to erase, and if you draw, really light, then you probably won't even have to worry about erasing it. All right, so this we said is the corner of our center building, and I'll kind of show you some of these examples as we're working. So that line is the corner. Now looking at this, you can probably see that diamond shape that we just made. So I need to know where this building ends going this way and ends going this way. So it doesn't matter how big, I'm just going to pick a spot, draw a line from the top of the diamond to the bottom, come over here. I want my building to be about as far this way as it is this way, so I'll try and get pretty close to the same height and go from the top of the diamond to the bottom like that. Now, since this building is not see-through, I can erase that part of the horizon, because we're not Superman, we don't have X-ray vision, we can't see through the building. So there's a good start to my first building. I'm not going to worry about details just yet. I'm going to draw a few more buildings so I can show you a few more things. If I wanted the next building to be just as tall as this one, then I would only need one line right there. So I've already got my second building, and all I had to do was draw that. Now, if you do not want it to be the same height, you need to come down. So I want a shorter building next to that one. So I'm going to make a little mark there. Now from that mark, I'm going to put my ruler going towards my vanishing point, and draw a line however far I want it to be. Then I can draw the far side of that building. And now I've got a building that's in the same perspective. It's just shorter. That's the only difference with that building. These parts of my diamond I can leave forever. Where I don't need it though, I can erase it. Alright, so we've got a building that's the same height as the one it's next to. We've got a building that is shorter than the one that it's next to. We'll do some different things over here. Maybe I don't want my buildings to touch, but I want them to be close. Kind of have a little alleyway, a little walkway between them. I'm going to draw the next line real close to that building. Here, we didn't need that line because these buildings were touching. Here, I want to see some space between them. Then, I'll draw the end of that building. So if I erase this, and I erase this, and I erase this, it kind of looks like a building is there, except it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It kind of looks like just the flat front. So how do I show that side? Well, if I start here and I draw towards that vanishing point, I'm not going to see it, right? So what I need to do, and this is probably the most confusing part, but if you can figure this out, you've got it. Most of the things on this side of the page are going to point towards this vanishing point. Most of the things on this side are going to point towards that vanishing point. But if it's the side of the building instead of the front of it, then it'll actually point all the way across the page towards the other vanishing point. Just a short little line that stops when I hit the building next to it. Same thing down here. That'll show that little alleyway between those two buildings. Alright, last thing, let's say all these buildings have either been the same height or shorter. What if I want a taller building? Well, I need to start by making my line taller than the building it was next to. I can go ahead and draw the top of it pointing towards this vanishing point. Since I went past the top of this diamond, I needed to draw a new line for the top of it right there. And then this one will work just like normal, all the way straight down. So here is again one of our could be confusing parts, because I don't see this side, right? So I need to do the same thing we did with this little bitty line. I'm going to start there, I'm going to point towards my vanishing point, I'm going to draw until I hit something else. So now when I get rid of these lines, now it looks like that building is next to this building and just a little bit taller. Alright guys, so that's how the basics work. That's how you get your basic building shapes. Remember, something like this is perfectly fine. We don't have a lot of details, we just have a lot of shapes. We do want some details though. We want to see some things like windows, some things like doors. So let's talk about that real quick. If I want to show a door, now keep in mind this is supposed to be a really tall skyscraper, right? So if I want to draw my door, it might only be this tall. Well, since it's on this side of my page, I need to make the top of the door point that way. Point over towards that vanishing point. And then I can go back down. If I was drawing a window up here, it would work the same way. Start with the side. The diagonal lines will point there. The difference is, since this door is below my horizon, it points up. Since that window is above the horizon, it points down. So all your details, all your windows and doors will work that way. None of them will be like perfectly straight. As I get down here, they're going to be pointing up. They'll get closer to being straight as I get towards the middle. And as I get way up here, they'll point down. So if we look at this example again, we can use our ruler and see that the roof, or sorry, not the roof, the top of this door points towards that vanishing point. The top of this one points towards that one. Same thing with all of the roofs. Our lovely taco sign. Any diagonal is going to be pointing towards a vanishing point. Same thing for this one. Way more windows, lots of more details, but they're all pointing towards the vanishing point on the side of the page they are on. All right, my friends, this is tough, this is challenging, but I know every single one of you can do it. Do your best. Look at these examples, the examples that I showed in the video. If you want to watch the video to pause them to see, that's fine, but I will also have them on the page for you to look at. If you have any questions at all, please, please, please don't worry about asking me. Do it, it's fine. You can email me, or like we said this week, you can use that Flipgrid link that we would normally be using to turn stuff in. But this week, since we're gonna spend 2 weeks on this project, you can use it for questions if you have any. That's it. Next week, we'll check back in. We'll do maybe a little bit of reviewing. We'll probably add some more details, some more doors and windows to this one. But take your time. This is really cool once you figure it out. I understand it's probably challenging right now, but a little bit of practice and I know every single one of you will be able to do it and be able to make something great. And like we said, this one is perfect for what we want. If you get this many buildings and this amount of detail, then you've done great and you've figured it out, something that's really difficult for people to figure out sometimes. So good job. All right, my friends, we will see you next time. Can't wait to see what you're working on. I'll check back in with you next week. See you later. There it is. That's the direction. See you guys. Bye.